I want to thank all of you for acknowledging this moment that we're in. We would all be remiss to not understand the time that we are currently coming together in. And so I want to start there, right at the top, because it would be inappropriate for us for not to ask you about what you would do about that. When I was running for delegate, one of the things I often found myself saying is, I'm not running for city council and I'm not running for Congress. I'm running for delegate because the work that I want to do gets done in the General Assembly. So that is my question to you. What would you do as a member of Congress to stop police from killing Black people?
Thank you, Sally. This is first and foremost about justice. We have to make sure that justice is served, justice is applied. Clearly, not all police officers are bad police officers, but we do have some, and these incidents against African-American men, recently, cry out for justice. But once we have justice, we have to have equality. And we may not be able to be all equal per se, but we're all equal under the law. We as members of Congress have to pass policies, have to advocate to fix these inequalities that we have in our society, whether it's with income or whether it's gender or whether it's healthcare. We have to, LGBTQ rights, we have to be vigilant about defending equality of all Americans, especially those that are suffering from injustices today. And as a congressperson, you've got to bring people together. You've got to get people to talk. You've got to get people to cooperate. You've got to pull, whether it's law enforcement or community groups, departments in federal government, you've got to get them all together and you've got to get them to communicate so that these basic inequalities that we've been suffering for so many years can start to be fixed. And we can do that in this pandemic, coming out of this pandemic, because we have a unique opportunity to do a hard reset on a lot of things that have been wrong in this country for so many years. But I would start by absolutely being an advocate for justice and making sure that justice is applied equally to everyone in the country.
Thanks very much, John. The second person would be Claire.
So there is a lack of accountability in our justice system. There is a lack of accountability in our police force. And, that police officer that murdered George Floyd had a rap sheet of complaints against him. It's not just the police officers to his left and his right that allowed him to continue policing. It goes all the way to the top of that police force, to the police chief and to the mayor. The fact that the DA who declined to prosecute the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery, it took the volume of all of Americans in order to bring those men to justice. There has got to be accountability in our judicial systems. I cannot imagine being a Black parent in America right now. I cannot imagine fearing the very people that are meant to protect me. That it is unacceptable and we must do something about it. The inequalities in this country are systemic. The unequal access to education, to healthcare, to the internet, to clean water, it is unacceptable. As your representative, I will lift up the voices of the Black community. I will ensure that they are heard. Every American must listen to them and we cannot deny them their experience any longer. I will take on those institutions and I will fight until we have absolutely vanished the inequalities, the systemic inequality that exists across every issue we talk about as community leaders.
Thanks very much, Claire. Cameron, you would be next.
So for me, I have an interesting relationship here in this conversation about law enforcement. My father worked in law enforcement for over 30 years. And when I was 16 years old, an officer pulled a gun on me in a routine traffic stop. So I understand a lot of the dynamics at play. What I would say here is that it's about having real solutions. The communities themselves who are being faced by these absolute injustices they are rising up, they are speaking out, they are doing exactly what you need to do. They're making the noise. Without struggle, there's no progress. And that work is happening. And I was great. It was great to see John yesterday at the event here in Charlottesville, as folks were standing up and speaking out, hundreds of folks here in the area. But it requires more than that. You know, when I worked in the White House for President Obama, I worked on something called the Baltimore Task Force in the wake of Freddie Gray's murder. And we were working on how can we create some solutions around this. I did this work around police involved killings in the Obama administrations as part of the My Brother's Keeper initiative. But what I'll say is I'll give you two examples of things that we in Congress can actually do to move the needle on this, to complement the work in communities. One is amending the US code, the criminal code, 18 USC 242, specifically making it so that when officers use excessive use of force, they can be appropriately prosecuted, and it doesn't require that higher standard that we currently reserve for officers. That's a simple change, and it's something that we need to do so that we can achieve justice. The second thing is President Obama had something called the President's Task Force for 21st Century Policing. It was funded through the Department of Justice. There were great resources wrapped around it, and there's something called Campaign Zero that continues that work today. Really leaning into those recommendations and operationalizing them, I think, is an absolute critical need. But again, it's about Congress leveraging that space, leveraging the resources that they have to make sure that communities, local law enforcement are changing to become more equitable. People are standing up and speaking out, and we as representatives in Washington need to also magnify those voices in a meaningful way.
Thanks very much. And then RD, you can close us out on this question.
Great. I'm going to be releasing some stuff this week about the continuum of force that we learned about in the Marine Corps. But what I'm going to do now is read a statement. I'm sorry, I just need this piece of paper to get me through this. Without the courtesy given to a feral animal, another Black life was extinguished. Why is George Floyd dead and I'm alive? The only difference between me and George Floyd was the amount of pigment in his skin. This isn't just about the police. It's also about just about his death or this video. This is about the journey of how a Black human being was treated like an animal. For many of us, violence has been part of our lives. Whether it was not feeling safe in my own home, the sudden death of a parent from substance abuse, or the violent death of a fellow Marine, tragedy, violence, and injustice have often found their way to me. And yet I am so ill-equipped to feel what these families are feeling right now. I've had the privilege of meeting with the mothers of the movement in Danville. Just last week, I spoke with a single mother of Black children here in Albemarle, and I cannot experience the same fear for Alice that she does for her children. That's okay. My take is completely irrelevant. It always will be. What is important is that those of us with the privilege to live without this fear listen to and amplify the voices of those who do not. I don't want to be here was how Killer Mike phrased it. How honest, how raw. And yet he's out there trying to balance getting justice and doing his part. His balancing act, solidarity versus keeping the peace, is something many of Americans of all races can relate to. Being treated differently because of the color of someone's skin is not just a problem for African Americans, it's a problem for all Americans to acknowledge, confront, and reconcile. I think my time is up, but this is the time in our country where we really need to understand and try to have as much empathy as we possibly can for folks that we just can't possibly understand what they're going through.